you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Ay, sorry.
Maybe we can start now. Let's start with a short prayer. Can I ask Ma'am Doris to lead us in prayer? Ma'am Doris.
Okay, sir. Let's all remember we're in God's holy presence. With the Catholics, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, for gathering us again. We ask for the guidance of your Spirit, that we may be open to any new learnings today, and that with all that we do, we always do for your greater glory. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
It was in the beginning, now and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma'am Doris. Before I give the floor to Father Oji, I just would like to say happy teachers to all of you, to all of us.
Thank you.
And of course, Shai Shai is the winner.
Natalo niya si Dean Keyboard. Natalo niya si Dean Keyboard.
Dean pa rin, sir. Si Dean pa rin.
Sige. So, first of all, I would like to thank you, for joining us this afternoon. Actually, I called for this meeting because I met with Father Oji last Friday, for our sort of updating, of what we discussed last Thursday's meeting with course developers. And I think he would like to share with us some few points before we actually begin. If you have not yet started with our work on Coursewares, I think Father will share with us what exactly the output that we are expecting from each group sometime in October. We can also discuss more practicalities later with Father if you wish, if you have more questions and clarifications. Okay, Father, I'm now giving the floor to you.
Thank you, Dean Ray. I'll just share the screen again. Okay. I just want to check po, parang could you just give a thumbs up if you are able to view the screen that I'm sharing right now?
Yes po, Father. Makita po.
Okay. Thank you po. Thank you very much. Okay. Once again, thank you po for sparing time to attend this session. As Dean Ray has mentioned, parang as I understand, parang many of us are already preparing to undertake our courseware development process. And what I'd like to do today is maybe to again first emphasize again parang the importance of instructional design, and then secondly talk about parang practical pointers parang so that we could be guided in terms of the development of our courses and specifically our modules. And then third, I will just refer you once again to some resources that you can access to be able to help you parang supplement your the knowledge that you already have, but this time siguro in terms of how we could package our content for online delivery. So if you would allow me, I will now share my slides. Okay. So what you're seeing right now in a slide is really parang just part of the presentation that I have been showing you. No, previously parang we've been talking about the courseware development process, and what we are now going through is the part where we have already identified the subjects, and at the same time the faculty will be working on it. And at this point, parang we are in a sense parang formally going through the steps, process necessary to be able to produce courseware. As I mentioned, parang I just would like to reemphasize the importance of instructional design. Just backtrack a bit. By instructional design, I've showed this before in a slide. Parang there are many definitions for it, but really instructional design, which we are doing at this point, is to be able to create an instructional environment where we could take one learner from a state of not being able to accomplish something to a state where the learner is able to accomplish the tasks that he's supposed to do. There are many models of instructional design. I will just be flashing briefly or rapidly through the screen some examples of instructional designs. But here you have parang 12 examples, and these are mostly classic instructional design models. I'll just show you just so parang that people will understand na parang in terms of the question of instructional design model, there's really a plethora to pick from, no? But what we're trying to do is we're digging back into our own heritage as a Jesuit university to come up with our own instructional design model. So this is model, the ARCS model, and this is the ADI model. This is the 4C ID model. No? So in effect, parang many models to speak of. No? But the whole idea is the same. No? Parang what model do we use so that we could bring our learners from a state where they're not able to do something, no? To a state that we would want them to be. No? And last time we also talked about parang features of online education. Let me just go briefly through some of its features. No, some of its essential elements. No, is that we're going to use technology. That's why we're building courseware, and this courseware is the platform in which we are going to deliver not only content, but also our instructional strategies. No? Another element of online learning is that there's also mention of the time element. And what we're trying to do in building courseware is to really move towards a more asynchronous course design. No? And then the last part there, which you can see really is in terms of defining online learning or online education, there are a lot of synonymous terms that are involved, no? Parang, when they're trying to define it. Another common theme, especially in teaching online, is that it involves different kind of interactivity. You know? So you would always notice that in online education, parang the courses that we design should really promote interaction, no? Not only with the content, but also with students and also with the instructor. No? Some of the things here, parang we do away with in comparison to a traditional classroom, parang online learning is really a setup where parang we would have to rely very much on how technology can accomplish the same things that we would want to accomplish if we were in a traditional classroom. But this is going to take place, no, unlike in a face-to-face setup in a traditional classroom where that kind of feedback could easily be mediated precisely because of, you know, there's really no physical distance between us and the student. But here, parang there's this whole idea wherein physical distance would make it difficult for students to verify immediately if, for example, there are things that they would need to ask a certain faculty. But of course, this physical distance is going to be mediated by the technology itself. Just so that we would be, again, on the same page in terms of what we understand by online learning or online education. Parang in the literature, parang they're talking about how online learning could be experienced through technology, either in a synchronous classroom or in an asynchronous environment. But for our purposes, I think what we're leaning towards, especially as we're building a course, is we would not be heavily dependent on synchronous setups, but we will try to design our course so that we could be able to teach us asynchronously and our students could access our course content asynchronously. So so the difference really in terms of what we're doing is that the same kind of Jesuit education that they'd like to provide our students is now being delivered to an online environment. So that in as much as we could be doing something like this, parang we take it for granted that when we're discussing this whole idea of co-telepresence, wherein you sort of forget that you're actually talking through a medium, and we feel that we're just talking to somebody who's just on the other side of it. We sometimes forget to take into account that that medium actually shapes and reshapes parang how we could interact in an online setup. So just to emphasize again our inspiration in terms of our own instructional model, we're really digging deep into our own Jesuit heritage. And by that, we're talking about the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, which many of us may have already encountered many times over these years. But just to emphasize that this IPP is not just a theory, it's not just a paradigm in the sense it's different from the theories that we would often discuss when we're talking about theories in our classes, because this Ignatian pedagogical paradigm has as its roots parang a spiritual foundation. And this is the whole inspiration which gives rise to this instructional model. So that in the Ignatian paradigm, from its original inspiration in the spiritual exercises, it imagines the interaction between between the retreatant, the director, and God. And what is happening here is that the director guides the retreatant so that the retreatant is able to get closer to God or understand how God works through his or her own experiences. Likewise, the director is also trying to get in touch with the movements of God so that he could better communicate how God moves in a retreatant's life. So this is the original spiritual dynamic that gives rise to the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. Because now, as it is applied in terms of the teacher-learner relationship, this same threefold relationship between God, retreatant, and director now manifests itself in terms of the relationship of the learner to the truth and the teacher to the learner and the teacher also to the truth. So that what's now happening in an educational environment is that the teacher acting as director guides the retreatant who is now the learner towards the truth. So this is really the foundational um, um, the foundational inspiration for the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. So if we compare it side by side, it would look something like this. And as you can see, if we just replace the terminologies, this is the one on the right, the figure on the right, is really parang how we conceive of it, of the relationship between learner and teacher, especially in a Jesuit educational environment. So we've already talked about the IPP before, and we said that the IPP, at least for us, is really our instructional model. No? So that what we're doing when we're creating, again, courseware is once again taking into account the context of our students in the midst of this pandemic and creating courseware so that we could provide an experience which is enhanced by reflection, which eventually leads to action, and whose action is subjected to a constant evaluation. So this dynamic parang hopefully is something parang that would be at the back of our minds, especially when we're creating courseware. And more specifically, as we're creating modules within the courseware. So how does this interplay happen, for example, in the concrete modules that we design in our courseware? So if we place that in terms of the teacher-learner relationship that we showed earlier, parang what is happening now is that for us teachers, what we're doing is really creating an experience for the learner so that the learner will be able to know the truth. No? Um, and that's what we're doing when we're doing courseware development, where once again taking into context, taking the context of the learner. That's always a starting point in Jesuit pedagogy, and then creating the entire experience which promotes this habit of thinking with it for habit of thinking in the learner himself or herself. So I think the pertinent question that we have right now is really how do we apply this IPP as instructional design model in the development of our courseware and in the crafting of our own modules. So once again, it's important to take note that part of the context that we should be considering is not only the context of the students, where they are at this point, but also the context in terms of the environment in which this teaching is going to take place. Now, this particular learning environment has many features. In the literature by Harasim, she talks about parang 5 characteristics of this environment. That it facilitates, enables many-to-many communication, that it can happen anywhere, that it can happen anytime, that it's really heavily text-based, no? But enhanced by social media. So whether it's video wherein a person is able to communicate parang his thoughts or the actual output that a person produces, no? It's really very heavily dependent on output which is read as text within that environment, no? And also parang the more obvious is that the messaging that happens, the communication that happens is really mediated by a computer, no? Which enables, for example, a student to be able to archive responses so that whatever you say here will forever be recorded within that particular system, no? And that parang yun parang, and so parang there's a greater sense of accountability in terms of content that is actually produced, because once it's out there, parang it stays there, no? So very different from our own lectures, face-to-face lectures, where sometimes parang we could be saying certain things, and after that, parang people can forget about it already, no? But at this point, parang it's there, parang it can be archived, no? So all of these things parang come into play, especially when we're taking a look in terms of how of the context in which we are designing our courses. So applying now this whole idea of the IPP as instructional model to our how we create our courses and how we design the modules within those courses. So we could maybe rephrase the questions that we used to have, especially when we're talking about context, experience, reflection, action, and evaluation. So by context, what we'd like to ask now is, so what do I need to know about my students at this time of the pandemic in order to prepare to teach them well online. No? Um, um, I think I may have to emphasize that unlike other pedagogies wherein the primary question is what content should I be teaching, no? In Jesuit education, ang starting point is not so much what content should I be teaching, but who are the students that I'll be teaching. No? Um, and I think this is parang it might be easy to miss out on this difference, no? Precisely because in our own disciplines, we are really trained to think more about our content, no? Parang in terms of how it's going to be delivered, parang what is essential in terms of what we should be teaching. That's very important, but in Jesuit pedagogy, the starting point is really where students are, no? Where the person is. No? And once again, I would like to say that this is not some random choice being made in Jesuit pedagogy, but it's really stemming once again from the experience and the writings of Saint Ignatius. No? We're in the spiritual exercises that the spiritual exercises, in a sense, could be seen as a very structured learning environment. In the sense of a retreatant is the experience is structured in such a way that a retreatant can move from a certain state to another state, no? So parang klarong-klaro yon, no? And it's very structured if you've taken a look and if you've read the spiritual exercises, where it's not really meant to be read, but it's an experience to be undergone. No? Still, despite the fact that it is very strictly and rigidly designed, Ignatius puts an emphasis on that the exercises always has to be adapted to the disposition and the situation of the exercitant or the retreatant. So we're taking off from that inspiration in terms of our design of courseware. No? So the question really that we should be asking while we're creating these modules, no, is parang where are our students right now? Parang can we try to put ourselves in their shoes? Can we try to understand their very different predicaments? No, because this is, kumbaga, this is actually an expression of our care and concern for our students. No? I understand that many of us really parang would like to teach well, no, and would like to deliver a content that is worth what students are paying for, no. But more than that, I think what we're trying to do here in this particular setup is to show that in as much as we'd like to teach that, that this is one way of showing our care and concern for our students. No? So that parang if our content parang adds to greater anxiety, to greater disturbance, to students getting discouraged about continuing their studies online, I think that should make us pause and think about, again, parang in a sense, why we are teaching in a Jesuit university. Because again, parang what we'd like to share with you, and I hope this is where we can find some common ground, especially as teachers, that first and foremost, parang to be able to teach our students well, we must, in a sense, parang learn to love them first. No? It, it's I'm sure many of us parang do feel that, no? And especially in this World Teachers Day, parang that's something, I guess, that is coming out as well, no? Especially when we listen to teachers sharing about their experience. That bottom line here is it's not just about the content, but it's because we care about our students very much that we would like them to know certain things about what we know. And that we could lead them to something which could be beneficial to them in the long run, no? And that is why parang we emphasize parang the importance of context in the IPP, especially in the designing of our courses. So with that basic understanding of where our students are coming from, no, then the threefold interaction, which is usually present in any in a learning experience also unfolds in the IPP. So there you have the interplay between experience, reflection, and action. So in terms of experience, really, as a model in terms of designing, the general question that we'd like to ask here is, how do I create engaging online learning experience that will help my student care or connect to the subject that I'm teaching? Notice the use of the words here, no? Parang, while I may have revised this, but I'm really taking inspiration from the documents itself, no? Na hindi nga siya ano hindi nga siya just that they will learn it, but notice the words to care and to connect, no? So parang there's always that affective component, no? And I think this is one crucial characteristic of Jesuit education, no? That it's not just something cognitive, but that the learning experience should fully engage the person, you know. And Ignatius knew this very well. That's why it was something that he always emphasized, no? Even in the spiritual exercises, to know a doctrine is not enough, but one must be effectively emotionally engaged as well, no? And for many of us, I guess the master teachers here would certainly find online teaching very difficult, kasi when we're teaching face to face, parang the aspect of who we are as teachers, it can easily be communicated when we're teaching face to face, no? Parang the non-verbals, the actual, parang human relations, no, the micro interactions that happen in a classroom is something that will be very difficult to capture in an online environment. And yet there's still the challenge of how we could simulate such an experience or create such an experience in an online platform. So the next part here is in reflection, where very clearly, not very different from how we've been doing it in a face-to-face setup. So how do we guide students to become more reflective so that they can deeply understand what they have learned online? I don't think parang there's much to be said there, no. But that, parang again, parang to deepening one's experience is again very Ignatian in a sense, no. So that when you take a retreat, sometimes even though you've already prayed about a matter, parang you're asked to pray about it again, to pray over it again, no, and again, just to deepen that experience, no. And all this reflection hopefully parang issues forth in some kind of action. So part of how our modules and courses could be designed now in an online environment is, how do we encourage and provide opportunities for students to act on what they have learned? No? How could this be expressed, whether it's in the form of an assessment, whether it's the form of another activity, whether it's something that they would have to do offline, and so on and so forth. But parang it's really an intervention to be able to make this entire learning experiences make itself concretely felt and concretely experienced in the life of the student. So once again, the inspiration for this is in the latter part of the spiritual exercises, where Ignatius says, love is shown more in deeds than in words. No, so there's this whole dynamic wherein, again, everything that we learn has to issue forth in some kind of action. We have to really do something. And I think that's a very parang, I might sound presumptuous by saying it's something very Jesuit, no? But this is certainly parang what we have experienced parang in our own formation, and something that we'd like to share, no? That the important thing here is to do something, no? To share what you know, to be able to make an impact, no matter how small, but to try to make an impact parang in your own way, no? And I think this is parang the kind of training and experience that we'd like to move our students to, to issue forth into some kind of action. And then the latter part of it is, in the design itself, to provide an experience wherein both the learner and the teacher is able to look at parang the entire learning experience, and to see parang where growth has happened in terms of this particular module or this particular learning experience. Now, the question here might seem very general, but later parang I'll show you parang more specific ways of how evaluation could be construed, especially in an online environment. Okay. Having said that, so once again, all these things, all these questions come into play in terms of the experience that we are providing through the courseware that we are developing, so that once again, the learner can be led to the truth. No? And I think the belief that we have here is that eventually, parang in terms of spiritual foundation, if God is indeed the source of all truth, parang making students appreciate yearning and searching for the truth parang is an experience that hopefully will also lead them back to God. So I think that's why we're in this business in a sense, no? Why education is something that the Jesuits have chosen to be in. Now, concretely, these 5 principles of the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm shows itself up concretely in the way we structure a particular lesson. A lesson, as we have been doing it, for example, in our IPP syllabus, always has a prelectio, a lectio, and repetitio. No, this dynamic is something that's not unique to Saint Ignatius. Basically, it's a method that he acquired when he was studying at the University of Paris. That's why prelectio, lectio, repetitio is what they call modus parisiensis, no? The way of proceeding in the Paris schools, no? And something which now has been appropriated and also being used in Jesuit pedagogy. So as a concretely, in terms of parang how we could imagine that a module within a course, it has to be structured in this way, that it should have a prelectio, a lectio part, and a repetitio. Now, for the prelectio part, there's a question here which I've said. Really, it's asking the question, first, what do I want my students to learn out of their learning experience? What do I want them to learn as they go through this? And then second important question in the prelectio part is, how will I prepare my students for their learning experience? How do I introduce this topic to them? How do I give them an overview of what's going to happen? So it's really prepping up the student for the learning experience. That's what the basic content of what prelectio should be like. No? Now, the lectio part is really the actual experience part. No? And the question here is, once again, how do we design and organize the activities that we have there and the resources that we provide so that we could fully engage our students? So once again, deriving from the whole principle of an experience which is not only cognitive, but which is also affective, or which is more or less holistic. No? This is the real challenge of parang planning for the lecture part of any module. No? Now, the last part is really, again, a hallmark of Jesuit education. We're taking off. In fact, parang one of the old Jesuit adages when it comes to teaching is few principles, many examples. No, so that has been, in fact, something that was present in the Ratio Studiorum, which is the precursor of the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. That has been in place for the past 400 plus years. No? So it's the same idea wherein repetitio is really a way, once again, of developing not just depth, but also mastery. No? So we could think of the repetitio part of the module in terms of how we could reinforce the learning experience of our students in this module. Given that there are, parang concrete methods in terms of how the IPP could be implemented, no? There are overriding pedagogical principles to take note of, especially in the design of the learning experience. One is, of course, cura personalis, that whatever we put out there, should always be adapted to the situation of the student. And I think parang this is actually what's behind, if we've been able to listen to how Father Joel's um, speeches, no, and dialogue with the students. Parang this is really, and also the faculty, this is really what's behind it, no. That in this online setup, what we're trying to do is to take into account first, no, really parang who are the students that we are teaching, what are they like, no, and how are they parang in this particular platform, in this particular setup, no? So in a sense, parang our modules hopefully should be permeated by the spirit of Cura Personalis. Now, this could show itself in many ways, especially in how we could carefully and lovingly design our courses. No? But it's really parang taking into account that my design will always be influenced by thinking about the student's situation. No? Not how I want it to be, but how it could be adaptable to them. No? The other principle is non multa sed multum. I've mentioned this before. In English, it means not many but much. No? Again, consistent with the whole idea that the Jesuits, at least in the documents, it was stated there that the Jesuits always believed that parang you can teach anyone, no? As long as, for example, even young people, you can teach them a lot, no? By making sure that the content that you delivered will be in parang digestible, will be digestible. So ibig sabihin, pagbaguhan pa, you give them content that is easy to learn. As they become more and more sophisticated, then you give them harder and harder content. This same principle is in fact codified even in the spiritual exercises. Ganun din, for someone who is new to the spiritual life, you give them very light content. No? You feed them milk, and then as they become more proficient, then you feed them hard bread. It's the same thing that underlies this whole idea of non multa sed multum. No? And in crafting the modules, no, similar to what we've mentioned before, that we should adopt principles of chunking, making sure that parang each module is bite-sized. No? It's really taking into account non multa sed multum. No? The whole idea about it is, if you'd like to invoke the cognitive load theory, what we're trying to do is reduce cognitive load so that the students will be able to really absorb content. No? So students will learn. Students will be able to learn if we are able to give them something that they can really accomplish, and that sort of builds their confidence as they're going through the many activities that we provide. And then the third overriding principle is tantum quantum, no? Wherein yon parang what we use in terms of how we design our courses, okay, should always be, again, in favor of the students' learning. No? So if it's something that's going to be difficult, then maybe that may not be the best way to go about it. But if it's going to help them, then maybe let's use that. No, let's take advantage of it. No, one of the things that I've experienced in terms of Tantum Quantum is that when I started out, I tried to use a gamification platform.
Pagawa kami ngayon ng Courseware.
In terms of a gamification software, no, wherein students parang undergo parang an adventure experience and they earn points about regarding it. No, but at some point, parang it would have worked parang if parang students had better access to internet, and parang students were better briefed in terms of how to go about it. So at some point, parang I felt, and I consulted with the students as well, that it was not helping them. So I had to change entirely my setup, and basically scrap it. In as much as I have invested in it, scrap it because it was not helping anymore. Likewise, parang I think that's the whole spirit that we'd like to, we might be so attached to certain things, but if it doesn't work, then Set it aside. Just use whatever helps in as much as it's helpful. So right now, in crafting that learner experience, as I said, one of the features is really to make this experience as something that will engage the entire person of the student. No? So we could think of it in many ways, but perhaps I'm grateful to the suggestion that was made by Acera, no, in terms of how we could envision this engagement. No, um, one could conceive of this experience in terms of the many interactions that could be possible in a particular module. No? So one could have a student to content interaction, a student to student interaction, or a student to instructor interaction. So let me show you an example of a student to content interaction. So what you have here, for example, is an example of interactive content. No, literally at the basic, what you can do is provide a video that students can pause, fast forward, or rewind, especially if they want to understand what the lecture is all about. But I think I've shown this example before, but this interactivity could further be enhanced by putting in video prompts within the video. No? As I mentioned, we have the technology for this. I'm teaching the course technicians, and some of them are already learning how to do this, that if you have a lecture video, we could actually insert prompts, whether quizzes, simple quizzes, or parang additional text within the video, no, to enhance the interactivity of the student with the content. So this is just one example. No? Every time you put in a lot of clicks there within the content, that also enhances interactivity. No? So another is student-to-student interactivity. No? Now, that might mean something as simple as provided in Moodle, no? A discussion forum, no? Which wherein students do not only share their thoughts, but they're actually sharing their thoughts with other people, and you allow other students to comment on it as well. And at the same time, this could also be seen as a student to instructor interaction, because every feedback that you give here in response to what the student posts is an example already of a student to instructor interaction. Now, you could make use of other collaborative tools such as Google Docs. If you've been using it before, we can always insert that link within Moodle, so that if you have collaborative documents that you want your students to work on, you can have that as well. No? Now, in terms of student to instructor, of course, there's the typical web conferencing platforms such as Zoom or Google Meet or Big Blue Button, wherein you're directly interacting with students. But student to instructor interaction could also be conceived in terms of you parang providing feedback for essays or parang simple or short answers that your student would provide. So that is already a kind of a student instructor interaction. Now, if we're able to design our courses well so that it can run asynchronously, part of what we'll be doing is just providing feedback and really giving more specific directions and guidance in terms of what students are answering or what students are giving us. So this is what we mean when we say that the learner experience should also be characterized by interactivity. Now, how does this whole IPP look like in a particular module? No? What I'm showing here is a module which is now available through Diagler, no? Which exemplifies parang what we were talking about earlier. No? As you can see, this module, the right of this screen, has certain elements. We call these components, or in Moodle they're called activities or resources, and each of them would have a certain structure. No, so you have an overview. Okay, learning outcomes, required learning activity resource, the reflection content part, the learning assessment part. Now, if there are many things that you'd like students, the more industrious ones could undertake, you can provide that in further resources. So we place that here so that we can make our content, our lessons more bite-sized. No? I did mention, I think before, that one of the principles in online courseware design is the whole idea of compression. No? As a benchmark, typically, if your normal seat time is 1 hour, in an online setup, you would have to compress that to half the time that a student normally spends if he were or she were in a traditional classroom. No? So yun, parang further this entry for further resources, if is a component where we could give additional suggested content so that if a student really wants to deepen his own learning, he could take a look at it. And then the evaluation part is at the end of every module, or depending on how you'd like to arrange it, this is a part where the student is able to look at his overall learning experience. It's not just focusing on the content that he has to learn, but it's really him asking parang how well he is learning or how he is not learning in a module. So that gives him both the capability to assess his own learning, but also it can also provide the teacher feedback in terms of how a course could be designed better so that it could really address parang what students could need in the future. So this is an actual module within in the courseware that we're talking about. No? This is a particular topic that I'm teaching, definitions of indigeneity. No? So what you have here is the video. There you have it. It has certain naming conventions. No? So una, parang it identifies what the content is and then the title of the content. And as you can see, merong duration dyan. Okay, I must have missed out this one. No? So the duration actually gives the student an idea of how much time he or she would spend to be able to accomplish the activities in a module. No? Now, if you are able to sum it up, no, you can actually have just like the practice that they do in other commercial courseware, no, wherein each module they would have a part there where it says parang it will take you an hour or 2 hours to be able to finish this entire module. So that helps in terms of planning our courses to be more bite-sized. It can help in chunking the course further. And it can also help, no? Halimbawa, one of the challenges, I think, in terms of how we're designing is not to think in terms of weeks, but to think in terms of the number of hours that it would take for a student to learn your course, no? So that we could just break down those hours so that the students will be, given more agency in terms of how he or she could plan his or her day to be able to accomplish the activities in your course. No? So what you can see in the screen are examples of how this plays out in an actual module in a courseware. No? But I will just show in a later slide parang how this interacts, all these components would interact with the instructional model that we discussed earlier. So this is, I just placed this because for the grade school, there's using Google Classroom. So if we were to parse the components that you can find that you can find in a module, you could, the pre-lecture part would really consist of the overview and the learning outcomes that we put in there. And perhaps we could conceive of a pre-lecture as the further resources that you provide. No? So preparation for further learning about this particular topic. The lecture part would really consist of the required activity or resource that you want your students to take. So it could be a video lesson that they have to watch, a PDF file that they would have to read, something that they'd like to answer, etc., etc. Now, the repetitio part would be about the reflection, to deepen the experience, to reinforce again what a student should be learning in a particular module. The learning assessment is also a way of repeating. In this sense, in this case, repetitio as a form of assessment, assessing how a student is learning the content. And at the same time, the repetitio would be a student going back to his own learning experience and seeing, parang it's like if you're familiar with the Ignatian examen, the evaluation, the repetitio part is really like the examen when you're forced to look back and identify which parts ba dito parang medyo hirapan ako, which parts dito easy for me, how can I improve further so that I could, accomplish the next tasks with greater ease, no? So once again, parang the whole idea is really founded on our own spiritual principles, no? So looking at this framework again, where you have, as I said, the pre-lecture, lecture, repetitio, and all the parts in a module. So all of this, what underlies this entire module, the components in this module, is really the context in which we are designing these courses, no? So parang again, at the back of our minds, parang if I were to teach this to a group of students, if I were to understand their situation, parang this is really parang the running current underneath parang how I'm designing a module in a course, no? Now, the experience part, properly, is really the entire pre-lecture, lecture, repetition. So, in other words, parang all the things there with the reflection and the evaluation, it's all the experience. But if you want to be specific about it, parang we could say that the required activity resource would be the main primary learning experience. Pero yun, parang I think if we make such distinctions, parang we lose sense of the spirit behind it, no? Because everything naman talaga is a learning experience. It's everything is connected to each other. They all reinforce each other to provide that learning experience for the students. Where does reflection come in? In the module, parang you have the reflection part and the assessment part, no? These are where you could make those, you could make reflection, in fact, a kind of an assessment in that module. Or as we have noted here, there's one reflection wherein the student is just prompted to take a look at parang the content that he has learned, no? Now, this is a style, as I mentioned, which they have adapted in edX, no? So that every module, at the end of it, meron talaga sila doong part lang wherein the student is not asked to accomplish anything, write something, but is just made to pause, think, and reflect on whether parang he has been able to learn the objectives or the outcomes in that particular module. Now, in terms of action part, the required activities, no, could already be parang the action part that we are talking about here. The assessment that the student has to do could also be the action part, no? So in other words, parang that it provides for a greater flexibility. Parang ang klaro lang dapat dito is parang to understand what this activity or component is supposed to do, no? Is meant to concretize what a student has learned, no? So in that sense, parang an assessment could actually be seen as the action part in an IPP model. And then the last part, the evaluation part, could be assessed first in terms of the actual assessment, in terms of the student learning the content or the student being able to attain the learning outcomes in a module. But evaluation could also refer to, as we've been talking about earlier, the overall learning experience. In other words, parang we're not just teaching students here to learn the content that they're supposed to learn, but we're also trying to teach them the habit of learning how to learn. And I think this is very conscious. This is again a hallmark of Jesuit education, no? So that parang what we would like to expect, parang what we would like to wish for our students is that if you know the habit, if you know how to learn, you can basically be in any field, no? And you can just pick up from there and just learn it, no? So while many of us may have devoted ourselves to a particular discipline, no? Yung this capacity to learn can make us actually parang move into other fields and be as competent in it as well, no? Once again, parang all these things parang really emanate from the experience of Ignatius, no? Wherein, parang even at a very advanced age, parang he has to learn again with the schoolboys, eventually go through the steps in order to get an education, no? And it's an experience that is always being replayed in the life of every Jesuit. And in fact, parang everyone who is perhaps in a Jesuit institution, parang ganun din, no? We often find ourselves in a position or in a role which we have not really been prepared for. But if you know how, if you can teach yourself how to learn, then parang you will always find yourself parang eventually being equipped for the task that you are confronted with. So ayun, parang so even in an online environment, I think parang the basics really are practically the same, no? In terms of what we do. No? The only thing that really differs that provides an inflection in terms of how courses are designed is us taking into account the unique features of the online learning environment. No? And us parang trying to see how we could maximize this online learning environment to be able to basically teach parang what baga attain the goals of Jesuit education. If I may just uh, move back again to an earlier slide, no, which I did not show you. Really, parang what we want to do is to put our mark even in this online education platform, no? The distinctive spirit which marks our own university as a Jesuit university and the education that we provide as a Jesuit education. No? So this distinctive spirit, as you can read from that slide here, is really, once again, parang based on the lived experience and the writings of Ignatius of Loyola, which continues to influence both the Society of Jesus and the institutions that have emerged from the Society of Jesus, no? Including the educational apostolate, of which parang you and I are all part of at this point. So ultimately, parang what we want to do, even if we're teaching online, is still the same. Parang our ultimate goal, which makes us different from any other instructional model, because here we don't just want our students to be competent, to be knowledgeable, but what we're doing in observing this particular way of designing our courses is we're still aiming for the ultimate goal of Jesuit education, no? Where what we're after is the full growth of the person, which leads a person to act, and hopefully act informed by his own growth in his faith. So while this may be expressed in very Christian terms, I think parang whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, whether you're a person of goodwill, parang the whole flourishing of the person is what we're after. That's why our courses, our pedagogy is really after the engaging the full person and not just the brains of the person. Because yun nga, parang I think one of the hallmarks of what we want to do is even in how we're designing all the subjects that we're teaching. You might be teaching mathematics, political science, anthropology, history, theology, philosophy. I mean, it's the entire bag in the School of Arts and Sciences. All of this is meant to really help the person flourish, no? And yun, parang this is really what we're trying to do, parang as we're designing the course, no? So that parang I think hopefully parang it is in this spirit, no, that we're moving into this courseware development process, no. Now, in terms of in terms of how this parang plays out, most of us, the course developers, the course development team, the instructional designers, and the course technicians are here. No, I have shared with you tools before. No, and here parang these are all tools just to help you again plan your courses. No, we've made use of an alignment tool to be able to, because alignment again is a particular aspect in terms of how courses could better be appropriated in an online setup. No? But regardless of whether it's online or offline, parang the alignment is something that's important. But it's a tool. Parang it's not, in as much as it helps you, use it. But parang if you plan it well, this will be a helpful tool. Now, the one that we would need, because the course technicians will be needing it, is the course design blueprint. And here I will show you, if you're seeing this in your screen, parang this is what we will give to the course technicians so that they can build the course. No? That we already have 3 sessions with the course technicians. Last session, we tried to work on a sample course design blueprint, which is a module which I've created. No? And what they did was to try to transform it into this. No? Let me just broaden this slide. No? So in this course design blueprint, as you can see, it's very important to be able to parang put in parang how long will each material that you provide, how long will it take for a student to accomplish that, no? So that parang at the end of it, parang makita natin, is this still, am I chunking it well, or is this just a big chunk and my students will choke on it, no? So kung malaking chunk, then provide another sub module so that parang it could be more bite-sized, no? So as you can see here, we placed here the title of the module, no? And then the title of the components, whether it's an activity, a resource, or an assessment. So here in this case, as you can see, I will just show 2 screens siguro para it will look more obvious parang how this will translate here. Okay. So and then parang at that part, parang you have the part where if you want to put in a description, so that the students will be more or less aware of what they need to do as they click on it. You can also put it there. And then what we've placed here is a format. Now the format is really, Moodle provides for certain activities, no? That could be kumbaga transposed online, no? So that's why meron dyan yung talking head is really a video like this where you're basically lecturing or explaining a particular topic, no? If you put in a text, the course technicians will also know what to do with that, no? So this one that I'm showing you on the left side of the screen appears as, will look like this, no? So as you can see here kanina, the title of the section or the module is here. The overview, if I click on this overview, so it has the duration, okay? It has the title, it has the format that is to be used, and also, ito yung kailangan po, no? A link to where you've saved the files that the course technicians will use to upload, no? So in this case, I would recommend that you save it in a shared Google file. Tapos doon, just provide the links there, just share the links there, no? So that the course technicians can download it and then upload it here, no? So this is what I've done here. So in this case, as you can see, sa overview pa lang, basically the overview is a pre-lecture, a teacher explaining what this module is going to be all about, no? So that's going to be a brief explanation, and you can do that whether audio or text, but it would be more preferable to use video because it's one way of increasing instructor presence in the modules that you're creating. So it will look like something like this, no? Ayan po. Okay. Yung malaki, hindi naka-arrange. So may face there. So ayan. So ayan po, that's me parang talking about what the module is about. And then okay. And then the next part here, where you have the learning outcomes, no? You can see it here, parang it's built as a page. And then here you have basically learning outcomes. And then a reading, which I've provided here. So I've made na parang it will take an hour to be able to read this reading, no? So it's here, I placed it here as well. Tapos nilagyan ko ng description dito sa course design blueprint. and then a link to the file so that when it's uploaded by the course technicians, nandiyan na siya kaagad. And then the other component, so you have here video lessons, short video lessons. So it's 7 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes. So I place it here with the link as well. And then once the course technician uploads it, andyan makita nila ulit, dyan yung video. And this is me talking about a particular lecture. No? So in this case, so this is me with a slide and then parang a picture of me, video of me explaining about the slide. Okay. And then dun sa part na nakalagay na my learning activity na halimbawa dito, video criterial and relational definitions. What I've used here is a link to a YouTube video. But I've added additional notes, no, wherein nilagay ko na if to bookmark the content at this particular time, tapos to insert the formative question wherein the student will be asked about this set of questions. So how that will look like when it comes out here is yung sinabi natin na na interactive content, no. I'll show you something which the course technicians actually built, no? So tingnan natin yung ginawa ni okay. Yan. So this is how they built that, no, using the same specs, no. And then from here you have where naka-bookmark siya agad, no. This is where following the instructions that I made, naka-bookmark dyan siya kaagad. And then at the end of it, lalabas the formative assessment that I would want to be inserted in my video. So in this case, parang I placed as additional notes, parang the questions that I want to be placed there. Or I can just provide a document wherein I can list down those questions. Now, as for the other components, ganun lang po yung kailangan ilagay dito sa course design blueprint, no. The reflection part, no. How would that look like in a course, no. Teka. Yan. So, yung course, yung reflection that I was talking about will just look like this, no. Parang it's really just a prompt wherein I ask the student to, I'll just read it. Before moving on to the next activity, please take a moment to reflect on your learning and identify how well you think you have understood the lessons on defining indigeneity and whether you're able to accomplish the learning outcomes for this section. Of course, you could be more creative with that, no? Now, you might think, baka hindi na nila kanyan. But the important thing here is really that this needs to be accomplished, no, before the student can move on. So parang we're really inserting that kind of break, no, just to parang instill that habit, no, na after learning something to take pause to be able to look back, even if briefly, on the content which they have learned or the experience that they have gone through, no? And then yung mga learning assessment, here's another example that I made, no. Simple lang siya, discussion prompt nakalagay dyan, no? And then I have here posted under the content, no, instructions on what they're supposed to do. So what the course technician did was to create an activity here. And then basically they just placed, placed the instructions that I made here, no? So that when I looked at it, no, okay, managing standard. So yun po. And then the last part siguro, yung evaluation na sinasabi ko. So you have here that part, evaluation. If I click on it, it's actually a feedback tool. And then all that the student will answer is like this, no? How would you rate your overall learning experience in this module? So parang it's something that you could repeat for every module. Kung meron ka ng template, or if you want to just follow this template, okay din, no? But if you want to, parang craft it in a way which you think might be helpful for you as well. No? So in my example, I have here, ayun lang, how would you rate your overall learning this experience? Meron dyan. Then which part of the module did you find difficult to understand? Which part of the module did you find easy to understand? What else would you have wanted to learn from this module? Now, again, if you were familiar with the examen, para lang siyang examen at the end of a learning experience, no? So ayun po, parang that's really the modules that you will be creating, which form the entire courseware, will just look like something like this. Parang it will just follow the same structure, and depending on how you would want to design it, no, parang it could be rearranged, but at least it contains the elements and the principles that need to be considered in the design of the course. So with that, siguro I'll stop, and maybe I'll entertain questions, especially questions that pertain to its implementation, or basically whatever question that you may have. So thank you po for giving me the time to explain to you.
Okay, thank you, Father Oji. Do we have questions, clarifications?
Father Oji, Rowie.
Ay, Rowie. Mayong hapon, Rowie.
Mayong hapon, Dre. Thank you kay actually first time na ko ni nakita katong detalye gyud, labi na tong Ignatian principles behind it, and katong sample. Ang question ako dire kay nag-department meeting gud mi last time, medyo wala kay mi naklaro ba unsay dagan ani. Kay murag na nakuratan mi atong per second nga kuan nga murag order kay murag mag kuan na kay ni murag mag dinumero na kaayo ang teaching. Siguro ang first question nako dire is please just allow me to kuan so kay murag first time po din nga murag mag-open up po ni ani. Ang does this mean that example kami na may Theo 1000 na po mi course on family issues. Does this mean, for example, there are 4 or 5 of us teaching Theo 1000? Does this mean that we have one common courseware? And if we have a common courseware, since independent na ang estudyante nga mosulod siya dito sa courseware, kay iyahan naman tong pacing. Naman siya iyahang proseso, naman siya iyahang pacing. Does this mean nga uniform na ang among kuan, among materials tanan, pati ang katong mga videos, tanan-tanan na. Meaning, this mean nga murag kuandre, murag kanabang sa konsepto po sa amo ang uniqueness kada teacher na napod mi kanang among extra nga mga resources nga amo ang ginagamit, mawala na ba to siya? So that's the first question.
Okay.
Kanabang unsa nga amo ang murabag kung mao ni ang courseware kay common siya, unsa ang murabag kanabang nabay space para sa amo ang kanang uniqueness sa kada teacher in the actual conduct of classes. Second, naputi question sa among department meeting, katong mga copyright materials gani dire. Like for example, personally, I'm also writing textbook. So, kung saan na siya, i-upload po namo sa dito. Or, bawal na mi gamit sa muang textbook. O, sabay mahitabuan ni kay kanaganing gwapo magini siyang initiative pero murag nakalitan mi ani dire personally murag nakalitan mi ani nga hala inaani na di ay siya ang courseware. So murag personally murag diha pa ko nga stage dire, although kung muingon ka nga gwapo ni siya nga initiative, gwapo gyud ni siya kaayo kay ang teacher manggod murag makapahulay pud siya ba kay magsigir siya. Imagine na diha ang student siya na lang mag go through unya by the example sa sunod nga sem o sunod nga year di na kayo hago murag hago lang murag sugod lang. Pero katong tuha nga question niya ikatulod re for how long ta maggamit aning courseware, mao na ba niya to ang new normal? Halimbawa nanay vaccine no, maokit tong vaccine sa Russia, Magrasya na bata niya or mubalik naman sa face-to-face or mahimo ba ni siya nga murag required or mahimong option dre? Ana. Last pa day, ikaupat, namo ko tigi isulti last time about sa deadline katong sa sem break daw. So, unsa bang watay di sa ta mag sem break ani unsa may tabo ani. So katulad dre more of na ay halo nga pangutana na po yung murag kabalaka. Oh, na may openness to kuan to adapt pero kanang napoy kabalaka ba niya. Siguro kung maklaro ni sa tanan murag hapsay atong pag-proceed. So katulad rin mga honest lang punto na ko ang mga pangutana o comments.
Okay. Salamat Ron sa pangutana no. It's good to ask those questions kasi maybe it's also the same questions that people have no. So dun sa first question regarding yung courseware na to so what we will be building parang think of it as a base courseware no. Murag nagpalit kag product na kotse. So pare-pareho ni nga kotse no. Pero the more you become proficient with it, the more you can customize it. No? But yung base template is really something that we will kumbaga whoever teacher is teaching parang it sort of assures na ito yung these are our standards no. Of course, parang to the second question na can I introduce other content apart from what is being agreed no? You can parang over time but ang kuha natin dito is that taking into account lang the principles that we may have no. And yun nga parang the courseware that we will be building will already form part of yung what will be offered sa atong Open University. So in a sense, parang by gathering your expertise within the department, especially those teaching a particular subjects, we can be assured na that the authored content is really parang in a sense parang peer vetted no or peer reviewed in a sense no because and parang what we have really is parang a gathering together of parang the expertise and the of people really teaching that subject. Of course, we may have our own ways of parang content that we may have to insert. Yun nga may nakalagay doon sa course development na over time teachers can customize the base template. And if you have, for example, if you found something in your own teaching of the course which can improve it further, we could factor that in so that the base template could be upgraded with siguro suggestions that you have made no and so on and so forth no. So ibig sabihin parang in terms of parang it's like really creating a textbook in a sense wherein all the faculty teaching that course have contributed to. So parang it becomes the shared it becomes the content created by that group of faculty no? So it's actually similar to parang how courseware is being offered by other courseware providers nadyo sila base template and parang faculty are assigned to actually manage or teach or maybe take care of assessments ganyan. But in our case parang this base template will be assigned back to all faculty no. So parang you're starting with that base template as it is, pwede na siya mudagan as it is no. But if you would have further things that you'd like to improve on or content, parang you can already add that on your own with greater proficiency in terms of the use of that courseware no. But what we'd like to do also is if the innovations to customizing the courseware that you introduce, if that could be factored in terms of upgrading the base courseware, that would certainly be helpful as well no. So hindi naman siya parang we're not denying yung the role of the teacher in customizing it no, because there are many ways of customizing it in terms of kung may test bank ka na ng questions, you could module provides the ability to be able to randomize it even further so that iba-iba, or you would decide na gusto ko ganito ang gawin ko dito, ganyan. That can still be done as well, no? Pero ang kailan lang natin at this point is that we just want to start with the base courseware, which incorporates siguro an experience which we would characterize as parang an online learning experience in ADU, no? But with greater proficiency, surely you can improve your courseware further, no? Taking into account again yung the principles that we have invoked in terms of designing the course. And then the third one, so ganito may mong third one, Ro.
Kada na nadista ko. Ma'am Vicky, ka na ko di mo barina i-off sa nadihabi.
Walay barina na ay nag-construct na building sa pikas kuan.
Ay mo di ay. O i-off sa imong mic, ma'am.
Oo. Na ay nagbalay.
Mo gani kay mag
ay nagbalay, sorry dili ko bitaw ko ka.
I-mute imo ang mic, Ma'am Vicky.
Nagklase bitaw ko unya. Di ko kasulti sa ila pero sige lang.
Naay ka ng mute diha nga kung ano ka ng microphone, i-click ko na Ma'am Vicky. Yeah, yes. Okay. Okay si Ma'am Vicky. Kuan magudre murag nakalimot na po ko sa kung order of katong question pero ang kuan na ni kay murag ang kanang concept ba sa idea nga ang kanang idea o concept sa kaning academic freedom ba nga we know what to teach. Klaro man na isa sa mga faculty kay I mean di ba at the very least we are masters in our own field pero kana bang mo go through kana sa individual nato nga classroom timpla-timplahon maginato na sa itong mga estudyante na gumangi nindot ka itong ibalikan na to Ignatian principles kay mo balik mo ka dito.
Yeah.
So in other words, Dre, natay katong entry or base model pero pag actual na nato dito, ang individual teacher pwede siya mo request ito sa programmer nga pwede ba ako aning i-tweak gamay kay murag murag tan-aw nako gwapo ni siya nga idugag or kuan gamay pwede ba na siya?
Yes, that's why parang part of the training is to teach the teachers so that they can customize their content. Pero katong base content would be something that we can offer na kasi
minimum.
Parang kumbaga nagpalit kag Mercedes-Benz imo na palit mo butangan nimo all the trimmings, ikaw bahala. Pero basig in the next iteration, basig katong imo na contribute, pwede ba nato na siya ipa-kuan dito sa base kasi murag kung nindot di ay siya nga kuan no. Basig pwede siya ma-improve further ang base template. So parang it's really parang iterative in that process, no. So murag ka-improve ang atong base template based on the experiences of teachers in terms of what could work better. So the next iteration that we would have in terms of developing it, no, we can work with you, no, so that we could develop it further and introduce new steps so that you can refine it further. Now, all the learnings that we get from your own we can incorporate into developing that base template. But parang yung base template is just base talaga siya. Oo.
The minimum. Dre, unsa ang tong mga katong copyright materials?
Okay. Are you saying copyright materials yung halimbawa mga
the ones written by teachers kay namputay mga kauban nga mga teachers nga mga authors sa lain-lain nga mga publication company. So unsa man na siya kanang mangita na lamig material nga
actually pwede man kay ewan ko kung ang akong ginagamit kay murag fair use na kuan eh. But I will have to consult yung the legal implications of that, pero as practiced ako halimbawa parang I use content which not necessarily written by peers, no, and I use them as part of my parang the corpus that I offer for students, no. I have not encountered kasi maybe yung the financial aspect of it would come into play, di ba? Halimbawa, if it's a textbook that's being sold by a faculty, di ba? And surely parang you would want to earn from parang if that textbook were to be sold. Ngayon, I think, but maybe that's something that we might have to discuss kasi di ba naging concern yon dati yung
Yeah.
yung
Gani, Enrique, concern man good po siya kay, for example, namagitay mga example highlight nga discipline sa mga textbook references, no? I'm not only speaking about myself, pero kana bang unsabay mahitabuan ni pag nanay courseware, bawal na may mogamit og libro. So murag ana mahitabo ba or karon lang sa ni or unsabay mahitabuan ni murag ana gani niya namang gutay kana murag existing nga textbook policy. So kana ganing murag naay dilemma gamay gani dire unsa may buhaton ani. At least I'm just trying to be transparent also kay lisod ng dili good istoryahan, dili transparent ba.
Sige, Aro, so for now parang the technicalities of it, especially pagdating sa ganon, yung sa locally locally authored na textbooks, and how it comes into play dito sa ating one. I think I may have to discuss it muna. Maybe Dinray, pwede nating pag-usapan yun with di ba? Or
yes,
may policy na ba about it before?
Yeah, because we are in a new situation. Kasi dati we are using the textbooks that are printed, no? Acquired by the teachers from their students. But now we are using e-books. So we have to do something on this. But at the moment, we really do not have a clear, precise answer to that question. But I would like also to invite our teachers that when we are teaching college students, maybe it's also good to go beyond textbooks. We use journals, make it more varied. We do not have to stick to one textbook only. So I think that's also a good point to consider. Because we know that we are already in the college level. So that's why maybe we can also use other scholarly resources that are we feel are also relevant for our own classes. But with regard to textbooks, this we will have to probably discuss more with the deans and with the ABP as well. How do we go about it? So far yun lang muna ang aming siguro can answer with regard to that concern at the moment.
Dre, yung last question, for how long we will use this courseware?
Yung the courseware will be there until
the end of
kasi
time.
Even if we revert to blended learning, the courseware will already be incorporated as so kumbaga yung the deepening that you would have to do as a teacher, parang you can do that parang face to face, but the courseware will already be part of our parang instructional setup. So hindi talaga siya pakawalan. So parang in face to face mo, you can give siguro additional materials in addition to what's there. So kumbaga using technology to teach will become a facet na of our teaching pedagogy in Ateneo de Davao. So murag forever and ever ro ang atong kwando. So dili siya kay based dito sa kwan ni Father Joel, blended learning will be our way to go. So we won't discard it even if we return face to face. But we will, kumbaga, kaya nga may nakalagay doon yung interaction with student to instructor, kasi that component will be the one that will be implemented offline, face to face. But all the rest, all that the students can work on parang in their own time can be done by the students through that online setup. But yung what will work more effectively in a face-to-face setup, that's where we would come in to basically deepen the topic or introduce new material and so on. So kuha na gyud siya. Murag padung na gyud ni sa pagkausap sa atong kuan. Yan na gyud ro. But thank you for the questions.
Question ni Roy about the deadline. Well, honestly, we are really pressed for time, no? And Kasi ang target sana namin with Father Oji is to be able to offer something to our students at the start of the second semester. So at least for the general education courses, that's why we are in our meeting last Thursday. I was appealing to our course developers that if we can have a common sort of parabang commitment agreement that we at least, if we cannot finish everything, at least we will be able to discover lang the first 4 to 6 weeks, no, of the course, no? So that's why parang prelim lang na part. So medyo ano lang, press for time, and I definitely understand that, and I also understand that this is an additional work to our faculty. So Father, I already raised this matter with Father Oji concerning the sort of honorarium, no, additional remuneration to our faculty members who are part of the team, no, of the course developers, if they would be also remunerated fairly, justly. So this is still under discussion, but I would really believe that, you know, our faculty members who are part of the course developers team have to be given their just sort of compensation, no, for something that really requires a lot of effort on your part. So be assured that I am willing to negotiate, no, with Ma'am Gina and even with the finance, that we give just compensation, remuneration to our faculty members involved in this very exciting, no, project. So yun, Rowie. So medyo press lang tayo for time kasi we hope na we can already, you know, have something to offer to our students, because this is something that we also sort of promise, no, to them this semester, but at the beginning of the semester.
Just to I've started consulting with NICE about it, no. I'm of the mind na parang intellectual work parang has to be compensated, especially in this one, kasi if it is really going to be an authored course, no, parang kung gumawa ka ng textbook, parang you'd really be spending no. So parang, but in terms of the details of that scheme, I think we would have to work that out. But we have certain precedents naman, as mentioned by Dean Raiden before, no, when we were doing yung course syllabus ba yun?
Syllabus for the GE
modules,
courses, for the new GE courses.
But certainly I'm also I support that, no, and probably the more later in the future, the more refined this courseware becomes, we can speak of parang other arrangements pa, so that you know, parang the intellectual work that you do parang also is able to support, or at least parang gains more value ba.
Father, copyrighted po na ba yung mga copyrights po ang courseware?
Meron, especially pag open source na open na nato. Pero for now parang limited siya to within ourselves pa. So that parang pwede ka pa mag fair use dahil hindi mo pa naman siya public. Pero pag nag-public talaga siya na open university, then we have to be more careful in terms of copyright. So ngayon parang in a sense, when you enroll into a class, parang it's like content that you use inside a classroom. So parang all the fair use statements that we can invoke, pwede pa siya, no? Kasi parang you're just borrowing a certain content and then using it for educational purposes. But once it becomes commercialized, yun yung challenge for the content creators, for the course developers, to really develop original content, because if you're going to monetize it, pwede tayo habulin din doon, di ba? So yun parang, but it's a direction that we will eventually take, that we will be taking. But for now, ito pa yung first baby lakang na to move into doing something like this, no. So it's really version 1.0, and then with each iteration we will be activating certain features to make it more and more parang user-friendly, to make it more and more original in terms of content. So that parang ang aim nito is something which you would see if you were taking Coursera or edX, where they now charge to get a certificate, magbayad ka ng. So parang ganun yung model eventually, no? But that requires parang even siguro yun, parang siguro it would spur teachers to really focus more on research, so that the content that you offer will be really something that you can call your own. So
pero Father, in terms of ownership, Father, we have teams, diba, that will create the courseware. Who will eventually own the courseware? Is it the university or going to be the faculty, the team?
Ang understanding natin, di ba, kasi parang intellectual work produced through the university and using university resources are primarily ng university. I think they have a similar setup sa Ateneo de Manila. Parang I forgot, maybe we could look at that parang that document that they have about intellectual property, parang who owns online material produced during these times, no. But maybe later on, yun nga, parang I think if it becomes a really specialized course with really original content contributed by faculty, then maybe parang that's time that we could talk about how we could, let's say, obtain royalties later on, no. These are discussions that we can have parang along the line. Pero ngayon murag gikuan lang sa nato, murag gilabang sa nato para we can have something na that our students will feel na that we're really making an effort in terms of providing them the education nga that we promise. Tsaka ang kuan nito very kuan kay if bad reviews pa rin tayo ng we will all sink. So parang in a sense, what we're doing right now is really an effort to make sure that we stay afloat. Kasi if we're able to design our courses well, students will feel na they're getting their money's worth, or they're getting the education that they expect. And we will certainly attract more and be able to provide for the needs of everyone. But if we don't parang do this well, a lot of us will really get affected by it. So yun, parang in terms of its practical mo itong makita nako na kuan kay karon murag dagan ingong mga estudyante nga say pulos pa mag-enroll next semester kung ingani ra gyapon. So that's why parang we're really, in a sense, parang counting on what we can do, especially GE courses, kasi at least yun, marami talaga yung matamaan nun, no? Kumbaga, you will lead the charge in our to regain our footing in this online setup. Let me just address Ro. Thank you, Ro. Napaka-ikuan na.
Thank you, Ray.
I'll just address some questions here sa chat box. Si Doris mentioned, do we need to include in the blueprint a file of the questions to be put in the video prompt and identify the timestamp when the prompt will be inserted? Yes, if you can do that, yes. Because the course technicians will know, will be help in terms of where to put it. So if you want to move in that direction, okay yun, parang ano yun, that will certainly improve parang how your content will be presented. And then from Grace GL. If the teacher wants to customize the base courseware, it is their task, that hindi na sa course technician, right? Yung base courseware, yes, no, that's why we'll provide training for the teachers as well, so that if they want to customize it further, they're the ones to do it. So basically, yung building the base courseware will be the course technicians responsibility, no. Of course they can help parang in terms of the technical aspects ganyan, no. But you know, parang customizing it further for their needs after the base courseware has been built will be the responsibility of the faculty. So tanong si Shercy, so everyone will be using Diagler. Okay. Yes po. That's why we're standardizing this and then putting it all in Diagler. And Diagler is Moodle, correct? And so that's why parang part of the once you've completed at least the first module of this, no, we'll start already training those who are not familiar with it yet, training how to configure it. Pero hindi na yung mga all the nitty-gritties, no. Basically what you need in order to administer and perhaps customize the course. Ayun lang po.
Father, i-share ko lang yung what we discussed last Friday with the group. 'Di ba last Thursday during our meeting, ang parang time frame natin, yung plan natin is October 26 is the parang intended deadline natin for the modules, no, that will cover the yung first yung pag-prelim. And then after, during that on October 26, and then during that week, the instructional designers, no, can meet with the group to critique, no, the output, and after which whatever output we have will be given or turned over to the course technicians. Father OJ suggesting maybe kung we will do it by chunks also, kung whatever, kung ano yung natapos na ng mga grupo, can already be discussed with the instructional designers, no, even before October 26 kung kaya, so that the course technicians can already upload, no, kasi Father Oji was telling me na medyo it takes time, no, the technical aspect of uploading videos, uploading kaning katong mga materials in the Moodle could require some time. So baka just to make our sort of schedule our targets more sort of efficient by if there are already things that you have done finished, no, if you have finished one module, maybe it's already good that our identified course instructional designers, no, can already look at, so that kung okay na, that can be turn over right away to the course technicians per cluster. Father OG, would you like to explain further yung suggested mechanism natin?
Yeah. Kasi I was thinking, kasi parang when we begin to think in terms of kailangan tapusin mo muna lahat, parang it becomes too overwhelming. But halimbawa ito parang one module, then it becomes more doable na every module you produce, na along with the instructional designer, you could parang critique and revise it already and then have the course technician produce it. So that parang chunk by chunk lang din yung work that we actually do. And once this is finished, we can already assign the course to you, and then we can start parang training in terms of parang how do you configure this, how do you configure that, if you want to add something. So at least meron ka ng isa, and then kung magawa ulit yung isa, pasok naman natin yung isa. No? So it doesn't, well, at least parang if perhaps it might be different for you, but if I were doing it, parang having it just one module at a time, na parang as soon as matapos, pasa ko na kaagad, then pasa. Parang it makes it easier, tapos it makes it more doable pag ganon. And then yun nga, parang it can in fact parang speed up the process because hindi ka magkaroon ng malaking lag time, no? So parang if you're thinking of it as an assembly line, parang the time when there's nothing being done because we're waiting for the complete product to be finished, that's going to be time wasted, no? Pero kung kunyari yon, parang each part as it is being built, parang is already parang passed on through the entire setup, then parang we are more efficient that way ba? Instead of just waiting for after the 4 or 6 weeks are completed, saka lang ipasok lahat. So I don't know, maybe you can express what you think about it. But the way I see it, parang it seems like parang easier thing to do. In fact, parang if the content is ready, I show this to the this module parang I've created in 15 minutes. Kung mahawd ng course technician to do it, parang it will be easier to configure everything parang siguro in an hour's time for one module. But surely parang the difficulty is really in faculty creating content or parang deciding the content that you, especially if you're going to record videos. But the principles here are really yun, parang make sure it's bite-sized, make sure it's focused on certain objectives that you have. It would be good if you could look at mga actual courseware. You can look at edX or if you have subscriptions to Coursera, or para so that you'll have an idea, ganito pala yung gagawin. Now, I've also, and maybe this is the part where I will advertise again, if you have access to Moodle, you can go to course categories and go to online education. I think this was also shared before by Dean Ray. You have here resources that you can use if you want to supplement your skills in terms of designing a course. There's an entire course there on learning to teach online. There's a course on instructional design if you're still interested in that. There's a course on learning outcomes and then learning assessments, assessment higher education, and there's also the template which I showed earlier, a sample of what it looks like. Of course, this will eventually be revised depending on the activities that you choose. But basically, just to show you concretely parang what courseware means in the concrete. Yun po.
Per module 3, may minimum ba number of hours? Or ano ba? Depende sa content mo?
Depende sa ano mo depende sa course. Usually ang style nila, let's say if we were to take a look at what is being practiced, a typical week would run for 3 hours. Ganun din, parang 3 hours. So, but in that week, parang may arrange siya into several sub-modules so that at a single time, a student does not spend more than 30 minutes parang just accomplishing what he has to accomplish for that particular section.
Okay. Do we have other concerns, questions?
Sir Ray?
Yes, Glenn.
Okay. Mayang hapon, Dre.
Mayang hapon, Ben.
Mayang hapon sa tanan. Dalang ko'y pangutana, Dre, concerning sa role sa instructional designer kay we had our meeting last sa UMLET, last Friday. And one of the questions pertain to the role of instructional designer. It would appear that in our previous discussion with Sir Ray, we had this instructional designer for one school. And now it was agreed that we'll have to have an instructional designer for per department. For each department, I believe.
For each course.
For each course. So now these faculty are somewhat apprehensive as to who wants to be the instructional designer because they do not know, or probably they would like to know what are the standards that they need to look into, or some pedagogical approaches that are required of them to look into. So that's one layer of why they need to be clarified with the role of the instructional designer. And second, if these instructional designers are not to be trained I think the problem there is that sometimes we have our own standards and we have our own things that needed to be pushed when it comes to this coursewares. So I don't know if you have additional training for instructional designers, pads, so that this faculty will be happy.
Okay. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for that concern. First, I actually just sent out an invitation for the school-wide instructional designers this Thursday.
Okay.
And I directed them first to some reading materials on instructional design, and as a site which is available here, yung itong sorry. Sorry. Itong Instructional Design Foundations and Applications on Diegler is actually an online course which I've rebuilt here, basically introducing people to what instructional design is about. So that, in a sense, provides a background of what could be done. But in terms of instructional design, we could we could have a we could invite them siguro maybe Dean Ray, kasi we're having something on Thursday. If that's not possible, maybe we can have a separate session for the SAS instructional designers. Basically, what they'll be doing is to again consider na yung IPP in terms of design, no? But to be more technical about it, really parang it's parang always mirroring and providing parang a counterpoint to how a course is designed, no? Taking into account first parang is it observing parang the IPP. Secondly, parang is it adaptable to online learning, no? So basically yun yung dalawang but surely we could but because this was parang a development that came out of the initial proposal, surely we could provide siguro a training, parang an understanding. We could share materials, kasi eventually parang this might be a process that we might all be going through, and it would be good to learn about it now, so that parang we would be more empowered within our own departments and schools to carry out this task as we go through the other subjects pa that we need to convert. I don't know, would that be yung initial po namin ngayong Thursday ng 3 p.m. I could send another invitation if that's possible. If not, we could find another time, probably either this week or probably next week, early next week.
Siguro also dire katong imuhang gi-present karon la parang share about IPP. Maybe it's also a very good material for our instructional designers to look into, no? It's part of the preparation for whatever sessions we are going to have with them. And then siguro dire ano na lang just a bit of explanation katong from your part katong what's the difference, no, between the school level instructional designer and parang GE course level na instructional designer, because that was also a question that was asked last week.
Sige. Basically the course ID will just be focusing parang specific to that course that's being developed, no? In other words, probably we're envisioning na medyo short term ang commitment ng course ID in terms of that course, no? And it's also taking into account parang something which came up in the literature na instructional designers who would have some footing in terms of the discipline that they're trying to develop, parang might help in terms of could be helpful in terms of creating instructional design that is more attuned to the conventions of the discipline. So that's really for the course ID. Now for the school-wide ID, it's a more longer term commitment because after the GE courses, we will be going through other parang the other tiers in terms of courses that need to be developed. So the school-wide designer will be in my stead be the one parang conducting na the training on instructional design, basically on IPP, parang helping faculty in terms of developing competencies and empowering faculty in terms of how that course is to be developed. At the same time, in terms of organizational structure, parang all the courses designed within a school will be vetted by the school-wide instructional designer. So parang you have another set of eyes parang trying to take a look at it. So basically, yun yung difference between the two.
Father, having said that, Father, ba, kasi sa SAS, ang dami talaga naming courses, no? And of course, we are composed of different clusters. So I was wondering kung sa school level sa SAS, can we have one ID per cluster? Kasi mahirap, I think, I was thinking of, initially si Shai was identified, has been identified as the ID for the School of Arts and Sciences. But considering that SAS is very big, no? We have about 19 programs, we are in 21 departments. So kung meron pang mga professional courses, and she would have to, examine everything, including the professional courses from all the clusters, departments, etc. Medyo baka it's too overwhelming for have one ID only for SAS.
Yeah, I mean that would be even better for us. No? Parang if other people could help out in ID kasi yun nga parang I think kailangan natin mas tutok talaga, especially during this time. No? And we'd like to support as many faculty as we want. And surely parang the task could not be done by one person alone, given the diversity and parang just the sheer amount of parang courses within the School of Arts and Sciences. Pwede yun din, Ray. Kung kuan.
Okay.
And then, if ever meron ka nang mapili doon, just send me the name so that I can invite them to yung Thursday's meeting.
Is that with which school, Father?
Lahat po ng school-wide kuan yun. So but if you have additional they're certainly welcome. I've already sent out the invitation, but I can resend an invitation to them, and the materials also that I've shared with the IDs. So yung din Ray, yung course IDs, I don't know what your decision is, but yun, parang there's this Thursday meeting. If they could attend, just give me the name so that I can send the invitation to them as well. But if not, parang I think let's find another time where we could just meet with the instructional designers.
Sige, Dre. And maybe kung there are IDs from SAS that cannot join, it's probably also good that we can have a copy of the recording, no? Kung merong just for the session this Thursday. I think that would be also very helpful.
Sige po.
Okay, anything else from the others? Do you have questions or clarifications? So,
Father, Sir Ray, mangutana lang ko kay Father. Father.
Hello, hi Bel. Hi.
Hi Bel.
Father, katong the one that you showed us, ba katong example dito sa imong course, Father. Pwede ba makasulod sa imong?
Sorry.
Pwede makasulod para matanaw na mo, Father.
Sorry po. Magis iyang password.
unsa to siya, Father? Pero okay lang sa imo, Father, nga para ma-navigate na mo kung saan dito siya. Paawakin na mo imong kwan ba?
Feel free po. Parang it's really for everyone. That's why I rebuilt
okay.
those courses para we could learn at our own pace as well.
Okay.
Kasi mahirap talaga yung panbel webinar kay konti
okay.
lang ma-reach mo tapos limited amount of time. But it's
So,
there para basically
Magis. Okay, sige. Father, sige, salamat, Father, kung natin siya password. Salamat.
Naalang siya dito under online education na category.
Okay. Salamat, Father.
Okay, sige po.
Anything else? Okay, so maghulat lang po from the assistant deans, no, kung if you already have identified instructional designers of the courses, no, of the GE courses as well as the electives. Kasi ang assistant deans, Father, are the project leaders, no? Sila yung project leaders.
So, baka may mga concerns yung mga as our assistant deans or iba pa?
May concerns ba mga assistant deans? Okay na si Glenn and Nelly. Si Doc Agnes, I don't know. Okay naman yata si Doc Agnes. Murag nawala siya. Parang wala na yata, Father.
Okay.
Alas 5 na rin.
Alas 5 na.
So, salamat tayo, Father. We will keep in touch. If we have questions kay Father about our own work, so just send us an email, no? Either kay Father or sa akin.
Yeah. And once again po, i-promote ko lang ulit yung the resources, some resources there parang were actually available through a paid subscription. But I've rebuilt them through Daigler. I'm sorry, hindi ko na na-rebuild sa Google Classroom for those who have difficulties with Daigler at this point. No? But maybe some of the techniques, the other details maybe that you're interested in can be found there. No? Very helpful yung at least the courses that I've copied from and rebuilt in Daigler. Sige po. Salamat po ulit. Thank you, Dean Ray. Thank you for all our administrators and chairs and course developers, course technicians, and IDs who are here. Salamat po. Thank you again for thank you for your passion. Thank you for your energy. Puhon, kaya lagi nato ni.
Yes, happy working lang, Father. Love
lang kung let's just do what we can. Let's just do what we can do.
Yes.
Salamat po. Thank you po.
Okay, thank you everyone. See you around. Bye.
Bye.
Salamat.
Bye.
Salamat po. Thank you po.
Bye. Thank you. Salamat.
Sayang wala nag-intermission si Shercy.
Thank you, Father. Bye-bye. Thanks, Sir Ray.
Thank you po. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Salamat kaayo.
Salamat. God bless.
Thank you po. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Dre, mangayo ko sa recording, Dre.
Ay, sige. Share na ako, David.
Okay.
Thank
you. Thank you, Dre. Ingat. Bye-bye.
Thank you kayo. See you ugma pod.
Yes.
At least okay ang atong kon.
Oo.
Kaya lagi.
Kaya ni Dre.
Pag makita na sa ubang kwan, sa ubang school sunsay.
Sige, Dre.
Sige, thank you, Rhea. Salamat kayo.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.